This talk is intended to consist less of a series of statements than a cascade of questions. Insofar as it makes statements at all, they are intended as provocations. I do hope that you will take up the challenge. Now, seeing as our subject is biography, you will forgive me if I begin with the largest question of all. What exactly is biography? Or, to put it another way, what action is biography supposed to perform? The simplest answer, but not necessarily the most astute one, is this. Biography is a record of facts, conventionally the facts of an individual's life. The trouble with this response, as with so many dictionary-type definitions, is that it tends to breed other questions, namely, what exactly are the facts, and what is the relationship between their supposed factuality and the process of their recording. Take a date of birth. In many cases, this is easy to check up on, but in most instances, it is of little significance unless it indicates something beyond itself, a sense of destiny perhaps, or a feeling of period. In other words, it is of minimal interest unless it contributes towards an interpretation of the life that follows, the account of which is itself necessarily arbitrary. Such an interpretation can only stem from an interaction between the biographer and his material, which itself is necessarily arbitrary. Biography, therefore, is in essence a process of interpretation. Biography is judgment. The earliest images we have of life writing make just this point. The ancient Egyptian papyri, known collectively as the Book of the Dead, or more accurately, the Book of the Dawning of Day, were conventionally placed in the tombs of the departed to smooth their path to the afterlife. They consist, for the most part, of a series of spells, but they also contain images, one of which envisages an episode called the weighing of the heart. Here is one of the best known examples from the Hunefer papyrus, now in the British Museum, and dating from the 2nd millennium BCE. At the center left of the picture stands a set of scales trembling in the balance. In its right-hand hand lies a human heart. In its left-hand hand, an ostrich feather. The heart belongs to the recently departed Hunefer, who is being led in from the far left. The accuracy of the test is being checked by the jackal-headed god, Anubis, who crouches beneath the left hand of the scales. And the result is being recorded by Thoth, scribe of the gods, reputed to be the inventor of writing, standing to the right of the scales, stylus in hand. If the heart is lighter than the feather, Hunefer will survive and be led before Osiris, god of the underworld, who sits enthroned on the far right. If it is heavier, it will be gobbled up by the bestial creature Amit, who crouches in a dog-like posture to Thoth's right, licking his lips in eager anticipation of a tasty meal. Biography, you see, goes back to the origins of writing. And notice the relevance. If biography is one of the oldest of forms, it is also amongst the most consistent. In reading a record of somebody's life, several queries will occur, but they all reduce themselves to very ancient ones. In the book you are reading, who is the equivalent of Hunifer? Whose heart is being weighed? Who is Anubis assessing the procedure? And what measure does he use? Who is Thoth, the scribe? Who is Osiris, on whose decision the final sentencing depends? And naturally, who is Amit, the greedy one? Let's move forward a couple of millennia. The 2nd century CE Roman writer Suetonius is the author of a work entitled Lives of the Great Prostitutes, regrettably now lost to us. What we do have is his vivid account of the lives of the first 12 emperors. Here he is, and it's in your handout, describing the last days of Tiberius, the 2nd emperor on the island of Capri. He made himself a private sporting house where sexual extravagances were practiced for his secret pleasure. Bevies of girls and young men whom he collected from all over the empire as adepts in unnatural practices and known as sprintii would copulate before him in groups of 3 to excite his waning passions. A number of small rooms were furnished with the most indecent pictures and statuary obtainable, also erotic manuals from Elephantis in Egypt. The inmates of the establishment would know from these exactly what was expected of them. He furthermore devised little nooks of lechery in the woods and glades of the island, and had boys and girls dressed up as pans and nymphs, prostituting themselves in front of caverns and grottos, so the place was openly and generally called the Temple of the Goat. If this lurid passage is placed alongside the Egyptian paradigm, who, I ask, is who? Already I hear your answers. In that passage, Hunifer is the Emperor Tiberius, Jeffrey Epstein himself. Thoth, of course, is Suetonius, recording all this squalor. But who is Osiris, the ultimate judge? And who is Anubis, the shrewd assessor? Who Amit, the hungry dog? Perhaps it all depends, dear colleagues, on who you are. If you are a sophomore eager for an alpha grade in classics, you will preen yourself on your likeness to Anubis, so wise and so fair. If you are an associate professor randy for tenure, you may picture yourself as Osiris, so dependable and so true. But most readers are neither sophomores nor junior professors. Most readers are Amit licking their chops. Tiberius / Epstein will clearly fail the test. Even now, Suetonius is a most popular biographer. Why? Readers are hungry dogs. If you doubt their canine credentials, consider this scenario. You are browsing in Barnes and Noble, or else surfing on Amazon. You discover a sequence of book blurbs. The first of them reads, "A fascinating biography of a man of commendable predictability." 1 star, perhaps? The next reads, "A fascinating biography of a man of commendable unpredictability." 2 stars, maybe? The third reads, "A fascinating biography of an unpredictable man who slept with several women." 3 stars? The fourth reads, "A fascinating biography of an unpredictable man who slept with several women and became a multi-millionaire." 4 stars, thank you. The fifth and last reads, "A fascinating life of an unpredictable man who slept with several women, became a multi-millionaire, and then President of the United States of America." This apparently is a bestseller. In the court of public opinion, you see, controversy always trumps rectitude. Why? Readers are hungry dogs. So maybe in the interpretation of biography, it is all up to us, our readerly selves. The ancients, I believe, fully recognized this, and accordingly they specialized in what I can only call comparative biography, where either several different accounts of the same life or else parallel accounts of contrasted lives were laid side by side, inviting a process of arbitration in which the reader was and is integral. The best example of the first of these options, different accounts being offered of the same life, is of course the New Testament Gospels. I said a while back that a date of birth is often easy to determine. But when it comes to their common subject, the Christian evangelists cannot even agree on this. According to Matthew, Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, who died in 4 BCE. According to Luke, his birth coincided with a census held by the Syrian governor Quirinius, dated 6 CE. So there is a 10-year wobble. Not serious, you might think, but it is compounded by the fact that the length of his ministry varies in these accounts between 1 and 3 years. These chronological inconsistencies, however, are minor compared with the giant issues these life histories raise, requiring from us a solution or response. Perhaps the most thought-provoking moment of all occurs during Christ's trial, when he and Pilate are chivying one another in Greek. According to John, Pilate is so frustrated at one point that he turns to the accused and demands, "Ti estin aletheia," what is truth? Then either Christ refrains from answering, or Pilate stalks away before he can. It is not clear which, since we are faced with one of those potent silences in which the biographer implies, "I'm damned if I'll tell you what happened, it's for up to you to decide." In the trial, of course, it is Pilate who is the judge, but over his shoulders and across the centuries, he too stands accused. But by whom? By Christ, who says nothing, by the biographer, who's so tight-lipped, by us readers, provided we are thus entitled. And are we thus entitled? It's an issue on which the subject himself seems to be clear. The second most potent moment in the Gospels occurs in Matthew, when in the Sermon on the Mount, the Son of Man addresses us over the heads of the crowd. "Mi kenete hina, mi prefete," he declares, "judge not that ye be not judged," which is probably what he should have said to Pilate. When it comes to the second option, the presentation of two contrasted lives, the undoubted master is Plutarch, the most famous of all the ancient life writers. Most of his biographies come in pairs, one Greek and one Roman. Plutarch gives us the CV of both, and then he invites us to compare them. Which of these rulers or generals was better, he asked, and in what respects? What were their vices, and what were their virtues? Both were eminent, of course, otherwise he would not be telling us about them. But did their achievements, their public achievements, come at too great a private cost? Here he is, comparing two famous commanders, the Athenian Alcibiades and the Roman Coriolanus, both of whom, under different circumstances, betrayed their country. Both stood accused of personal arrogance, but when push came to shove, which was the prouder? Plutarch concludes, well, Alcibiades would not deny that he rejoiced to be honoured, and was displeased to be overlooked, and he therefore tried to be agreeable and pleasing to his associates. but the overwhelming pride of Coriolanus would not suffer him to pay court to those who had the power to honour and advance him. Or his ambition made him feel angry and hurt when neglected. These are blameworthy traits in a man, but all the rest is brilliant. And for his temperance and superiority to wealth, he deserves to be compared with the best and purest of the Greeks, not with Alcibiades, who in these regards was the most unscrupulous of men and the most careless of the claims of honour. Well, that sounds like a conclusion, but you will probably have noticed that it raises as many problems as it solves. Alcibiades, Plutarch claims, got on better with his colleagues than Coriolanus did because he charmed them. But is charm a virtue, or is it a form of self-interest? Coriolanus may have lacked charisma, but he was the nobler man because he had more integrity. So where does the balance lie? 20 years ago, I published a biography of a 20th century British poet who, amongst other things, had crowds of friends and was a successful seducer of women. When it came out, it was reviewed in the London press by an eminent fellow biographer who took me to task. "You keep on telling us," she said, "how charming your subject was. But charm isn't a virtue, it's a vice. Moreover, in this case, it ruined his poetry, which, according to her, possessed superficial glitter but no depth." This, of course, raises another question. When we judge a professional person, be they politician or poet, are we supposed to base our assessment on their life or on their work? Supposing a nasty person writes great books whilst a nice person writes drivel, which should be praised? The dilemma is even more acute if the author wrote great books because they themselves were nasty, and drivel because they themselves were nice. In the 1930s, the great Irish poet W.B. Yeats raised this question in his poem The Choice. "You can't lead a good life and produce superb books," Yeats says. "You have to select." So his poem runs. "The intellect of man is forced to choose perfection of the life or of the work, and if it take the second, must refuse a heavenly house raging in the dark." This is especially the case with public people, including some fairly recent ones. As it happens, Plutarch's criteria of merit can be applied with profit to several American statesmen. Take Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the USA, as an example. In 1972, when he was coming up for re-election, some of his staff authorized a break-in of the Watergate building, the Democratic Party's HQ in Washington. When this fact came to light, Nixon ordered a cover-up, as a result of which he had to resign from the presidency in August 1974. But did Nixon fall from grace because he was a bad president, or because he was a bad man? It's a question which none of his biographers have been able to avoid. To John A. Farrell, perhaps the most eminent amongst them, Nixon was not exactly a bad man, but he was decidedly a weak one. For Farrell, Nixon suffered from what Aristotle termed a hamartia, a tragic flaw. His Nixon is hounded by demons, intellectually insecure, fearful of confrontation, unable to perceive the inevitable when it's staring him in the face. He's haunted by disaster, and Watergate, as well as his nemesis, is the fulfillment of his personal dreads. All his life, he'd been assailed by the fear of horrible disasters, Farrell concludes. Now everything that can possibly happen to him has happened. In an attempt to stave off the worst, it's all been brought on. At one point, he quotes Henry Kissinger. I sometimes had the impression, behind the former Secretary of State, that he invited crisis and that he couldn't stand normalcy. And again, triumph seemed to bring no surcease to this tortured man. It was hard to avoid the impression that Nixon, who thrived on crisis, also craved disaster. Appropriately, Farrell is drawn to theatrical parallels, Attic and Shakespearean. What happened to President Nixon, he states, is a human tragedy. When I say a tragedy, it does not mean that it was undeserved. It was like one of those Greek things when a man is terrified of his fate and fulfills it anyway, knowing exactly what is going to happen to him. But if Farrell is a compassionate fatalist, one of Nixon's British biographers, the Right Honourable Jonathan Aitken MP, erstwhile British Minister of State, more overtly plays the moralist. In his frenzied efforts to fight his way out of the quicksands of Watergate, Aitken wrote, it is Nixon alive, 1973, Nixon made himself guilty of many crimes, amongst them deceit, negligence, bad judgment, mendacity, amorality, and a disastrous reluctance to face up to uncomfortable personal confrontations. Thus proclaims the Right Honourable Aitken, sitting on the judge's bench. He did not remain there for long. 6 years after the publication of his book on fraudulently suing a national newspaper, Aitken was found guilty of perjury in the High Court in London and was sent down for 7 months in Belmarsh prison. You see, however lenient, however impartial, however severe they might be, biographers themselves are not immune from judgment. Judge not, that ye be not judged. You'll be pleased to hear, however, that this particular cautionary tale has a happy ending. On his release, Aitken found God, and he's now the Reverend Jonathan Aitken, the devoted minister of the established Church of England. So much for biography, but for a complete account of life writing, we need to include autobiography and memoir too. Where do these fit into the judicial process? Well, certainly they do, but if biographers are the plaintiffs in the case, autobiographers are certainly the defendants. It is no accident that the earliest examples we have of autobiographical writing from the oldest cultures are all memorial inscriptions, mostly self-composed. The Egyptian Book of the Dead offers several such, all intended to present the departed in an appropriately flattering light. Moreover, these have set the tone of the genre forever after. Autobiography, wherever and whenever it occurs, is an act of persuasion, a plea for mercy. I offer 3 very different autobiographical passages, widely separated in space and in time. The first reads, I have not done falsehood against men. I have not impoverished my associates. I have done no wrong in a place of truth. I have not learned that which is not. I have done no evil. I have not deprived the orphan of his property. I have not done what the gods detest. I have not calumniated a servant to his master. I have not caused pain. I have not made hungry. I have not been made to weep. I have not commanded to kill. I have not made suffering for anyone. I have not copulated. I have not misbehaved. I am pure, 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 pure. The second reads, indeed, Lord, to your eyes, the abyss of human consciousness is naked. What could be hidden within me, even if I were unwilling to confess it to you? I would be hiding you from myself, not myself from you. Now, however, my groaning is witness that I am displeased with myself. My Lord, every day my conscience makes confession, relying on the hope of your mercy as more to be trusted than its own innocence. The third passage reads, we can't trust the evening news. We can't trust our politicians. Our universities, the gateway to a better life, are rigged against us. We can't get jobs. We can't believe these things and participate meaningfully in society. When groups perceive that it's their turn, in their interest to work hard and achieve things, members of that group outperform other similarly situated individuals. It's obvious why. If you believe that hard work pays off, then you work hard. Or if you think it's hard to get ahead, even if you try, then why try at all? The first of these passages of the second millennium BCE is one of the spells accompanying the weighing of the heart in the Book of the Dead. The supplicant in this case being the recently departed Annie, whose heart lies precariously in the balance. The writer of the second passage from the 5th century CE is Augustine, father of the church, theologian and bishop of Hippo in North Africa, in his blockbusting Confessions. The author of the third is that illustrious deputy pharaoh J.D. Vance in his hillbilly elegy. And all of them are pleading. All their remarks, moreover, seem directed outwards or maybe inwards to some ultimate Osiris or judge. But exactly who is Osiris in each case, and what does he represent? We know that Annie's submission is addressed to Osiris himself, Egyptian god of the afterlife, because the surrounding text tells us so. In the case of Augustine, the trajectory has shifted to God the Father, first person of the Christian Trinity, who seems to play much the same role. It is also clear that Augustine intends his confidences to be scrutinized by fellow human beings. It's as if the door of the confessional is open and we are being invited to eavesdrop. Vice President Vance appears to be addressing his readership in the likeness of public opinion. Unlike the earlier autobiographers, he sees himself as a part of a group on behalf of whom he is pleading. Class consciousness is an important part of his message. Vance's Osiris is plural and impressionable. In essence, he is the electorate. But note that the tactics have changed too. When writing autobiographically, what must one have to do to placate the gods? In ancient Egypt, one had to claim to be very, very good. In the world of early Christianity, with its theology of repentance, one needed to be claimed to be very, very bad. In populist 21st century America, to obtain favor, one needs to claim to come from Kentucky. But whichever way it is played, it is clear that autobiography amounts to a form of self-presentation, even of performance. Those who espouse this form wish to be seen in a certain light and to persuade us, either through self-adulation, lavish contrition, or the pleading of special circumstances, to let them off the hook, and implicitly to admit them into various forms of immortality, whether through literal personal continuance or the legacy of reputation. Which brings us back again, of course, to Richard Nixon. Nixon's memoirs were published a mere 4 years after his public disgrace, and before several of his biographers got to work. But reading them again, how does he fare as an autobiographer? The speed with which his book appeared strongly suggests that he intended it as an answer to his critics, a form of self-vindication, in fact. In this respect, it falls within a well-etched tradition of works of political self-justification by leaders stretching from Caesar in his Gallic Wars to Churchill's account of World War II, which is probably closer to Churchill's earlier account of World War I, with his studied attempt to wipe out the fiasco of the Dardanelles campaign of 1916, which, as First Lord of the Admiralty, he'd spectacularly messed up. Accordingly, one is struck by the recurrence of certain generic tropes. Like Vance, Nixon stresses his disadvantaged background. Like Augustine, he aspires to humility, though of a distinctively Nixonian brand. There are confessions, though to be honest one has to search rather hard for them, as is his concession in a quoted speech of April the 30th, 1973, that instead of exerting presidential leadership aimed at uncovering the cover-up, I embarked upon an increasingly desperate search for ways to limit the damage to my friends, to the administration, and myself. But it is the resemblance of Nixon's attitude to that of those ancient supplicants, Hunitha and Annie, that is the most striking. In the face of accusations as to his dishonesty, lack of transparency, and the dodginess of his electoral dealings, Nixon's line of defense before the Osiris of public opinion is consistently to sound a note of profound inner integrity. Hence it is that he ringingly repeats his remarks to a press conference of November the 18th of the same year. I made my mistakes, Nixon states, but in all my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I have never obstructed justice. I think too that I could say that in all my years of public life, though I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether their president is a crook. Well, I am not a crook. Indeed, so close is this speech to the self-exonerations of the Book of the Dead that one is tempted to translate it into hieroglyphic Egyptian and to place it in a tableau we'll call The Weighing of Nixon's Heart. A translation might well run, I have not ordered a break-in, I have not sanctioned a cover-up, merely a cover-up of a cover-up. I have not doctored any tapes. I have paid all my taxes. I have not claimed excessive expenses. I have not sworn obscenely. I have not dishonored the office of the Pharaoh. I am pure, pure, pure. On which my discussion of Cairo Gate concludes. But whatever angle these stories are coming from, and whoever is telling them, it is hard to resist the conclusion that life writing of any sort amounts to an act of judgment. It has always been thus, and it will always be so. In biography, the author is the judge, and the subject is the accused. In autobiography, the subject is the defendant, acting as his own counsel. And what of the readers? In both instances, they, you, are surely the jury. Well, that's the end of my talk. As to whether it's been a good one or a bad one, it's for you to judge. But seeing as we are all hungry dogs and it is lunchtime, I commend it to your tender appetites. Good afternoon, dear Armand.